This is the second session of our 3 for the resources. And this afternoon is with DWR and Amy Ewing. And I will give quick bio for her and then we'll get started. One other thing, as you have questions for those just joining us, type those in the chat box as we go, and we'll be asking those periodically through the presentation. This will be recorded and posted on the association's YouTube site, just like all the rest of the trainings and sessions have been. So you can go back and refresh information later. All right. So Amy Ewing is an environmental services biologist and the Wildlife Information Services project manager at the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. Amy is responsible for reviewing projects, policies, and permits for impacts upon wildlife, wildlife habitats, and programs for which DWR is responsible, including threatened and endangered species protection. Amy represents DWR on the interagency team that oversees wetland and stream mitigation banking in Virginia, as well as other interagency committees, including the Virginia Forest Conservation Partnership. In addition, Amy guides and oversees the work of DWR's WIS staff, a data specialist focused on internal biological data projects, and a biologist focused on external education and updating of internal wildlife information. All right, so Amy, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Carl. I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully, yeah. Okay. Can everybody see my screen now?
Looks good.
Okay, thanks. Okay, as Carl mentioned, my name is Amy Ewing. I'm an environmental services biologist at the Department of Wildlife Resources. As I'm sure most of you know, we used to be the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, but that changed during the summer of this year. It's something we've been considering for many years, so I'm glad to see that it finally happened. I will mention to you that I'm home with 2 kids that are virtually schooling. I was able to put the dogs in their crates, but can't do that with the kids, so you may hear a child asking for assistance or something. I apologize if that happens. If so, we'll just keep on going. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Department of Wildlife Resources today. Our vision is leading wildlife conservation and inspiring people to value the outdoors and their role in nature, to conserve and manage wildlife populations and habitat for the benefit of present and future generations, to connect people to Virginia's outdoors through boating, education, fishing, hunting, trapping, wildlife viewing, and other wildlife-related activities, and to protect people and property by promoting safe outdoor experiences and managing human-wildlife conflicts. So a big part of what we do at the Department of Wildlife Resources and what most people think of when they think of us is wildlife management and research. We do a lot of habitat management. We do wildlife research, from genetics work to tracking the animals, that kind of thing. We do quite a bit of outreach and public education. A lot of what we do as the wildlife agency is educating the public that come into contact with the wildlife. We're also responsible for managing, providing, and educating people about the outdoor recreation opportunities in Virginia related to wildlife. That includes the typical things like fishing and hunting, but it also includes things like wildlife watching, boating, hiking, all the things that people do on our wildlife management areas, as well as some archery and other things. So there's lots of stuff that we do out there on the landscape. We also have a large law enforcement cadre. They're about half of the total staff. at DGIF. We have undercover and regular conservation police officers. And it's amazing how much outreach that these guys and gals do across Virginia. A lot of it is with youth and sort of underserved communities and that type of thing. But they really, excuse me, really do get out there and educate a lot of people about Virginia's wildlife and how to safely engage in outdoor recreation around them. We also have a fairly significant cadre of canine officers now, and of course, they're always a big hit. And then the other thing that we do is imperiled species protection and management. The Department of Wildlife Resources is the state agency responsible for the protection of imperiled wildlife, threatened and endangered species, species that we have listed as species of greatest conservation need, that sort of thing. And these are just some of those species that we protect and manage around. And we even do some, you can see here in the left-hand corner at the bottom there, some restoration activities, repopulation. This is a group of staff down in Southwest Virginia releasing propagated mussels into the river. And as you can also tell here, this is actually a video. It's not a video that I can play for you here today, but we do have a YouTube channel. So if you're ever interested in checking us out, seeing what we're doing, you can find us on YouTube. So the Department of Wildlife Resources has a mandate when it comes to listed species protection, and that comes from two sources. One is the Federal Endangered Species Act. As you know, the updated act is 1973, and it lists a species as threatened or endangered federally. It issues regulations to provide for species conservation. They develop and implement recovery plans, and they promulgate regulations defining take. We also have the Virginia State Endangered Species Act, which parallels the federal ESA, but it allows our board to adopt the federal T&E list, meaning that any species that's listed as a federally listed species also becomes listed in Virginia when they adopt that list, which they typically do on an annual or semi-annual basis. And then it also allows our board to add state listed species to the list. So if a species is not listed federally, but we feel like it's imperiled and we have the data to back that up in Virginia, then we can make that case to our board and they can list it in the state. And the way that that works, federal versus state, is anything that we list in Virginia has to be as protective as the federal law, but it can be more protective. So if there was a federally threatened species, but we felt like in Virginia it was more like endangered, then we could list it as endangered, but we can't do it the opposite way. We can't give it less protection in the state. And then of course the State Endangered Species Act basically replicates, but also defines take. And take is not only killing the animals, but it can also mean to harass them, to harm them, collect them, or possess them. So take has a number of definitions. It's not just, if you harvested the animal or you killed the animal. Even habitat modifications can be considered take. So when it comes to the protection, management, and recovery of species in Virginia, there's a couple steps or things that we really try to wrap around in that process. One is obviously we have to set up some sort of process for the legal protection and enforcement. So we have to make sure that any guidelines or protections or recommendations we make are legal. And then we do lots of surveys and research about the animals. We look at if we need to change the way we manage the species or their habitats. We provide consultation and technical assistance to our partner agencies, to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and to private landowners about these species. And then we may engage at some point, depending on what we find out about any given species, in restoration or even reintroduction of the animals in Virginia. We don't do that very often, but there are specific cases where we have reintroduced animals in Virginia. The most prominent one that I can think of is the red cockaded woodpecker. We were able to capture some animals from North Carolina many years ago and bring them up to Virginia, and we've got a reproducing population now on public lands. Oh, I will tell you that this particular example, so this is Rick Reynolds. He's our bat biologist, our mammologist, and he does a lot of nighttime work with mist netting and that kind of thing. And so all the work that he's done over the years related to the identification and management of hibernacula in Virginia turns into things at the DWR like this, which is a GIS mapping portal for certain species that identify hibernacula or roost sites. And then having those information, we'll provide information to the public about that. And then typically once we've got the data in order and it makes sense and it's telling us a story about those species on the ground, then we turn that into guidance or protective recommendations for that species. A number of years ago, the Fish and Wildlife Service started requiring wildlife agencies to develop what they call a wildlife action plan in order for us to continue receiving the funding that we do from the Fish and Wildlife Service for the activities around imperiled species. Our first plan was in 2005, and then we updated the plan in 2015, and we'll need to do so again by 2025. The 2015 action plan, which is the one that we are currently working under, you can find lots of information about it here at bewildvirginia.org. And there's even an interactive sort of locality driven system there to help you make some decisions. But the 2015 wildlife action plan was very different from the 2005 plan in that this action plan really emphasizes habitat conservation over just species conservation or identification. And it communicates priority actions and needs at the local level by providing online those local action plan summaries so that the planning districts have the information that they need to plan the conservation needs in their area. And then it prioritizes species not only by their tier level of imperilment, but also by identifying actions that we know of that we can implement to protect those species, or we indicate that there's not much that we know to do on the ground. And I'll explain that a little bit later. But the 2015 effort resulted in the identification of 883 what we call species of greatest conservation need. You'll see that term SGCN, or you'll hear me talk about imperiled species or tiered species. Those are all the species that are not listed, but are included as SGCN species. Now, in this list of 883 species are most of our listed species. So most of the threatened and endangered species of Virginia are also included in this group, but they may not be included in the highest level of conservation need just based on what we know about them on the ground and that sort of thing. So we really try with the wildlife action plan not to mimic the structure of threatened and endangered and species of concern and those things that we're used to, but to really think differently about how we think about our species. And one of the ways that I'll mention that to you is that bobwhite quail is in the wildlife action plan as a species of greatest conservation need, even though it is one of our game species, and that's based on some habitat, loss of habitat and that sort of thing across Virginia. So as I just mentioned, the Wildlife Action Plan in 2015 has these tiers of relative conservation need, with tier 1 being the most critical conservation need. It faces an extremely high risk of extinction or extirpation. All the way down to moderate conservation need, which indicates that it may be rare in parts of its range and that they're declining, but they certainly are not our most critically imperiled species. And then in addition to the tiers, we added these letter designations that I mentioned very briefly before. And this letter tells us whether, for example, A here, managers have identified on the ground species or habitat management strategies that are expected to benefit this animal, and that we have resources available to do that, all the way down to the C level, which is that we don't know exactly what to do on the ground, and we don't have the funding for it. So the tier lets us know how imperiled the species is. The letter lets us know how equipped we are at this time to address the conservation of that species on a statewide level. Okay, are there any questions about the information that I've relayed to you so far?
No questions so far in the chat box.
Okay, thanks, Carl. I'll just keep on going. So Carl mentioned in my bio a couple different terms and acronyms. I fall within what we call the Wildlife Information and Environmental Services section of the Department of Wildlife Resources. Ray Fernald is my manager. Ernie Aschenbach is my colleague, my partner in what we do in these sections. And then I manage the wildlife information staff, who again, Carl mentioned before, that's Karen and Susan. Karen works on assisting our field staff in management and development of data sets for the data they collect, and make sure that those data are developed and managed in a way that's appropriate, that they're shareable within the agency and among our partners, and that they're secure and accurate, that sort of thing. Susan is an incredible naturalist for Virginia, and she is our go-to biologist when we have questions about wildlife in Virginia. She does a lot of external education. She works really closely with the master naturalists and provides lots of education to them. And she is responsible for reviewing all of the data that come in based on collections, permits, and that sort of thing, and doing all the QA/QC for that before we push it live into our data set. So this is Karen and Susan, and like I said, they tend to do a lot of acting as liaison between the field biologists and the more technical GIS staff. They act as project manager and product owner for some of the IT and data set projects, web application projects, and things that go on at the DWR. They promote data collection, storage, and use by our practitioners in the field. They ensure that we can share it. They perform QA/QC of the collections and develop updating processes and implement data updates. So right now, Karen, well, she's on maternity leave right now with twins, but eventually she'll come back and continue working on some of the comprehensive databases and that sort of thing that she does. She also is an aquatic biologist, as you can see here. So in her pastime and for her work, she's out on the water quite a bit. And then Susan is a great herpetologist, so she tends to be found in this sort of scenario very often with some sort of reptile or amphibian hanging around. So anyway, great ladies, great at what they do, and great resources at the department. Then there's the environmental services side of our house. Again, that's Ray Fernald, my manager, and then Ernie and I, we're the ones that actually review projects and provide input and sit on all those interagency teams and that sort of thing. So as it was mentioned, we review projects, permit applications, proposed laws and regulations, changes to land zoning and things like that, all the NEPA documents. Our job is to ensure that any process that we're engaged in, that wildlife and their habitats are being appropriately considered, and that threatened and endangered species are being protected, and their habitats as well. We often recommend ways that projects or on the ground activities, such as the ones y'all are engaged in, avoid and minimize impacts upon wildlife. We will sometimes recommend mitigation for unavoidable impacts. And we work really closely with our GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and the Wildlife Information Services staff to ensure that that reliable data is being used for environmental purposes, both internally and externally. These are some of the laws and regulations that give us an end to some of these processes. So typically there's either a federal or a state law or policy that requires that whomever is permitting that project or approving that plan, that they engage with us and get our comments related to wildlife. So we've talked a little bit about the State Endangered Species Acts, both federal and state. There's also the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act that requires coordination with us. The Power Act, NEPA, all the different acronyms, RCRA and CERCLA and SARA, and then all the federal water, Clean Water Act, Coastal Zone Management Act, all of these laws and policies and regulations have some opportunity for us to have a nexus with whatever activities they're engaging in, so that we have the opportunity to review projects that use our natural resources or develop our landscapes, and make sure, again, that the wildlife and their habitats are being appropriately considered. So a little bit more specifically, when we're doing project review, it can be things like permit applications. So we see all the joint permit applications. We see the discharge permits, the water permits, the pollution permit. So that would be something like application of biosolids. We consult with lots of other agencies and even with our own staff on projects that they're doing on the ground. Every year I review the gypsy moth spray blocks. We review solar projects and wind projects. We look at the coastal consistency determinations. We look over all the nuclear projects. And then we also get involved in emergency response, mostly as a coordination point. But anytime there's a species kill or a train derailment or anything like that, we are in the chain of notification for that, and we address any impacts upon wildlife that's necessary, and we assist our agency partners in doing so. So the comments and recommendations that we typically make about any given project, the first thing we start with is avoidance and minimization. So we want anyone to avoid impacts if possible. If that's not possible, minimize those impacts to the greatest extent possible. And then if there's just no way to get around impacts upon a species or their habitats, then we may recommend some sort of mitigation for those unavoidable impacts. But we work all the way through avoidance and minimization before we start talking about mitigation. But sometimes we do, with certain projects that are of extreme value to the citizenry or something like that, have to accept some measure of impact and then find a way to make those animals whole again. One of the ways that we're most successful in that is funding. So coming up with some sort of required mitigation funding that we can then direct into ways that specifically support that species in one way or another. So the way that we are sharing our data, are there any questions, Carl?
Nope, no questions yet.
Okay, thank you. The way that we are sharing our data with the Conservation Planner, which is the tool that you use to design your BMP projects, is that we have something called the Wildlife Environmental Review Map Service, or WERMS. And there are a number of data sets that we serve out of the WERMS service. But what is being sucked up into the Conservation Planner is what we call our species observations. And they are getting in the Conservation Planner all listed species, and the locations of listed species are offset and buffered anytime we provide them to the public. And that is for the protection of the species. And it is legally exempt information according to FOIA. So we protect the specific locations of the listed species, but we give you the information that you need to make decisions. And then we have all the Wildlife Action Plan SGCN species. That's all those species that are imperiled but not listed. And then we also give you the common species. And neither the species of greatest conservation need or the common species are buffered. You're just getting straight locations for those. I say they, but I say you, but I really mean DCR. So, and then those data go into the DCR Conservation Planner, which is how you access them when you're doing your BMP planning. So let's get to that a little bit, because I know that's what you're interested in. So in the conservation planner, you will design your BMP, and then you'll review your spatial query results. And again, for the DWR data, you're going to get TNE and tiered species if they're documented within 2 miles of your project location. That is our typical project review boundary for any project in Virginia. That's what we call the project area. And then you're going to get common species that intersect the project site. So only if that species has been documented from the polygon that you draw, are you going to get common species that come up on your list, but they will come up periodically. So I have a little example here. This is a couple of years old, this screenshot, so I apologize if anything's changed, but hopefully nothing significant. And you can also see here that we're still DGIF in this old screenshot. But this is should be hopefully a screenshot of possible results from the DCR Conservation Planner. You'll see here that there are a couple different columns in this table. The first one is species ID. And what that is that's a number that we use at the Department of Wildlife Resources to track the animal. I know by looking at it that 04 means this is going to be a bird. Different animals start, different suites of animals, taxa, start with different first numbers. And then the name of the species is loggerhead shrike. Unfortunately, we started this database back in the 70s, and it was more typical then to do this sort of, last name, first name. So you'll still see loggerhead shrike written like that. If you look at the federal or state status, you'll see that there is no federal status for this species, but that it's considered state threatened. So you know that this is a listed species, loggerhead shrike. You will also see here that it does have a tier, and it is in the tier 1. So even though it's not endangered, which is the highest listing, it is included in our most critical tier. So sometimes those things won't line up exactly, and there are good reasons for that, but we don't need to get into that here. And then you'll see under other species of concern, this is where you see those SGCN species, those species that have a tier, but they're not listed federal or state. So for example, snapping turtle is actually a tier 4 species in Virginia. It may come off the list in our new wildlife action plan, because since the development of this most recent one, we've done a lot with harvesting of snapping turtles and that sort of thing in Virginia. So again, depending on how that works for us, they may be able to come off the list. That's the hope for that. Anytime we are working on development of regulations for harvest of any animal, whether it's a deer or a snapping turtle or a muskrat or whatever it is, those rules and regulations about how many you can harvest, when you can harvest them, all that sort of what body condition they have to be in, all of that sort of stuff. The purpose behind all those regulations is to ensure that we have a viable population of those species in Virginia. And none of y'all were around, but in the early 1900s, when our agency first came to be, things like deer were very hard to find on the landscape because they had been so over harvested. So then once we came into play and could start putting some rules and regulations about how people did that, we were able to bring back what we would probably consider a more than healthy population of deer in Virginia now. So there's quite a few examples of that in Virginia. So again, having put some rules and regulations about around snapping turtle harvest, we now may be able to get them off this tiered list, which would be great. So this is the information that you'll see, and where I have these circles is just gives you the information about the species. And then you can click on this link here to get more information about the species. So for example, for this species, loggerhead shrike, if I was to click on that link, it would bring up the Department of Wildlife Resources, Virginia Fish and Wildlife Information Service booklet. We call it a BOVA booklet, a Biota of Virginia booklet for loggerhead shrike. And if you see here on the left-hand side of the screen, there are a number of what we call chapters. And for this one, I'm just looking at the taxonomy. It gives me all the taxonomy for the species, any comments related to that, and then our citations for it. If I were to click on occurrence, then I would start seeing some maps, occurrence data for the species. Now these red observations, if you go in as a visitor, you're not a DWR biologist or affiliate biologist, you may not see the red dots on there. Those are kind of our collection records, but you will see the blue shadings and that kind of thing. You also can get, there's another chapter here that's called habitat. You can get information about the habitat on a species. You can look at references, you can look at its life history, get a description of, when it breeds and what it looks like when it breeds and all those sort of things. So there's lots of information in here. Again, we started developing all of this, compiling all of this digitally way back in the 70s. So some of it'll look a little bit outdated, but we're getting to updating it probably over the next couple of years. So that's information about the species if you click on that link. And you don't have to click on that link. It's just for your edification if you want to learn more about that species. And then you'll also notice, so this is the exact same screenshot that we had before. We clicked on that link just a minute ago and looked at the information about the species. Now we can link to the DCR guidelines, which includes our guidance. Oops, sorry, wrong way. And it'll give you some information about conducting searches and using our data, including the guidance that we have for how to address hits from any of these data sets related to your projects. So we have developed over the last couple of years with Carl some really specific guidance about if you get this species and you're doing this type of project, then do that. So you have to read through the document. Eventually you'll get to the point where you know which species routinely come up in your area and how to address them. But obviously the first couple times, my recommendation is going to be that you really read through the guidance document and learn it and understand it, and just know that you're going to need to reference it as you go through this. So let's do that. I'm going to take you through this guidance, which again should be available online. If it's not, let Carl know or let me know, and we'll make sure that you get a copy of it. It is a 5 or 6 page document probably. And I'm going to go through it here with you. I don't expect you to read off of the screen. I just want you to pay attention to sort of the big sections that I talk about and to just know where to find the information. So this is a screenshot of the document, the first page of the document. You can see that it's been updated really recently. We continue to learn about these projects and what our concerns about these projects may be. So we will continue to update this guidance and make sure that Carl gets a copy of the updated guidance anytime we do that. But there's basically just a couple sections on this document. The first section is the process, okay? So up here at the very top, it's gonna say, design your BMP, review the query, and then based on the below information, coordinate with us, and that kind of thing. So that's the process part of the document, just at the very top. Then we start getting into, okay, now if I get a hit, what we call a hit from the database on a particular species, what do I do? So that's where we get into this next section, which is the listed species information and guidance. So that's A, listed species. And it says very specifically, if the DCR resource query returns a hit, which is a documented record of a species within 2 miles of your project site, for a listed wildlife species, refer to the below to determine if you need to coordinate with DWR, and if so, with whom. Okay. So for aquatic species, for example, only coordinate with us when you get a hit for a listed aquatic species and your project includes in-stream work and or earth disturbing work, which includes tree removal and grubbing, within 300 feet of the stream bank. If your project does not include those activities, then you do not need to coordinate with DWR on that aquatic species. Okay. And then depending on the type of species, tells you who you need to coordinate with. And we have all the contact information at the end of the document. So for crayfish, mussels, and snails, you contact Brian Watson. For fishes, not including Atlantic sturgeon, you contact Mike Pender. For Atlantic sturgeon, you contact Clint Morgeson. But again, you only contact them if your project includes in-stream work or earth-disturbing work within 300 feet of the stream bank. So it's really important that you read through the document. We're going to be very specific about when and where we expect you to coordinate with us on hits from these databases. Let's see, for another one, let's do the semi-aquatic species, okay? So there are a couple species of turtles and amphibians and things that are semi-aquatic. They live in the water part of the year, and they have activities in the water like breeding, and then they live in the upland the rest of the year. So only coordinate with DWR when hits for listed semi-aquatic species are returned if your project includes in-stream work and or work within wetlands or work within 300 feet of the stream bank or wetland edge. And then it says here, amphibians, wood turtles, bog turtles, eastern chicken turtles, contact JD Klepfer. So if your species is not listed there, and you don't have work that matches what's going on, you don't need to coordinate with us. If you do, then you need to coordinate directly with JD Klepfer. Okay, moving on through the document. It's listed species continued for the next couple pages or page and a half. We go through birds, different types of birds, and they're all handled a little bit differently. So water birds and shore birds, birds of prey, bald eagles and loggerhead shrikes and peregrine falcons, they all have specific guidelines here. We also provide additional information sources for some species. Same thing here for bats. And the way that you know if you need to coordinate with bats is based on the location of the project, whether it's within or outside of certain regulatory buffers that you can find here. If you can adhere for projects including tree removal or significant forested habitat alteration, if it's not located within the high vernacular buffer, which most projects are not, and you can adhere to a time of year restriction that's protective of bat species from April 1 through October 31 for tree removal, then you don't need to coordinate with us. So there's a lot of if then sort of statements in there that you just need to be cognizant of and really pay attention to. And the way the document is set up is by species suite or taxonomy. So if you want to look at aquatic species, semi-aquatic species, birds, bats, then on the next page, we get into reptiles that are not included in that semi-aquatic section, and then terrestrial invertebrates. So it's by taxa. So you'll start, again, getting used to where these species are in the document and what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to coordinate with us on them. The next section, which is B, is Wildlife Action Plan Species of Greatest Conservation Need. So for these species, if they are not listed, but they are considered a species of greatest conservation need, the only species within that group that you need to coordinate with us on are freshwater mussels. And it's only necessary, again, if your project includes in-stream work or earth-disturbing work within 300 feet of the stream bank. But that's the only suite of species. So for example, on our previous example, we had snapping turtle. That's not a mussel. It is a tier 1 or tier 4 SGCN, and it came up on our database search, but it's not a freshwater mussel. So you do not have to coordinate with DWR about its protection. If you want to learn more about the species, you go to our data set like you've seen before and read up on the species and where it is. If you want to learn about what the Wildlife Action Plan says about how to best protect this species or what habitats it's found in and that sort of thing, you can go to that bewildvirginia.gov website and it'll give you some information. But in terms of required coordination with us for tiered species, it's only freshwater mussels. Okay, and there are reasons for that, why we want to see those projects based on the biology of mussels and the way that they congregate and that sort of thing. But for Wildlife Action Plan, species of greatest conservation need, which you might hear me call imperiled or tiered species, You only need to coordinate with us if there are freshwater mussels. And then common species, you don't need to coordinate with us about, although I do provide some contacts at the end of the form if you do want to contact somebody about it. You're more than welcome to do so. Then there's this section in the document called DWR Coordination Responses, and it reads, if a response from us is not received within 30 days of your submittal, you may document that and move forward. We don't expect you to contact us again or to hold up your project based on not hearing from us. No response from us doesn't mean we support the project or that there aren't going to be any impacts upon wildlife, but it indicates that we don't have the time to address it and you may move forward. And that puts the onus on us. You've done your due diligence. If we see a project that we are concerned about, we will contact you. And then also on this document are just what I call resource protection recommendations. So standard recommendations we make for different types of habitats or resources. So we've got some information here about stream buffers and wetland buffers and how to protect colonial waterbird habitat and things like that. These are things that, again, you can implement them as you see fit or as you desire, but there's no reason to coordinate with us about it. There's no requirement for you to implement these buffers, you know, that kind of thing. It's just information to help you with your project planning. Then at the end of the document, I mentioned this, we have our list of contacts. At the top, we have the non-game taxonomic experts. So again, that's your threatened and endangered species, your tiered species, all that sort of stuff. And we have both email and phone address, phone numbers and email addresses for the staff there. And then at the bottom, it actually goes over 2 pages, are the common wildlife species contact list. So these are regional biologists over either wildlife or terrestrial species or aquatic species, or the staff that are over lands and facilities. So if you have a project that butts up against a wildlife management area, maybe you'd want to contact one of the lands and facilities guys. If you had a specific question about a trout stream or something like that that you think runs by the property, then you might want to contact the regional aquatic biologist. So this is our wildlife, these are our wildlife biologists. And then these are our fish biologists is what we call them, but it's really aquatic species. So back to our loggerhead shrike example. And maybe I've already driven this home well enough, but so we got a hit on loggerhead shrike from our project area. So what I want to do is refer to the below to determine if I need to coordinate. And then here again with birds, it says only coordinate if I have these type of activities going on and I cannot adhere to a time of year restriction. And then I would look at the information in the document and find out who I would need to contact, and it would be Sergio. And I would do that by sending an email. I'll get to that on the next page, but this is basically, you know, the process that you go through. I got a listed species, it's a bird. I only need to coordinate if I have this, but if I have these activities happening, then I coordinate with the person that says on the list, which for loggerhead shrikes is Serge. To coordinate best with us, we recommend that you send an email to the identified biologist that includes the following: a boundary, a shapefile, a polygon of your project site, a map of the BMPs that you propose for installation. On these maps, if you could make sure to include a legend or a narrative. Sometimes we don't, our biologists don't instantly recognize the symbology, you know, so you need to let them know what is a fence, what is a well, that kind of thing. Lat long coordinates, the address or additional maps of the site, just give them all the location information that you can. Pictures of the area proposed for BMPs. A lot of times our staff can look at a picture and rule a species in or out pretty quickly, both in our aquatic and our terrestrial habitats. So for example, this image over here is really good shrike habitat. So if you got a hit for shrike and we saw an image for this kind of image from the project site, then we would be more interested in looking at the site than if it was just a big ag field or a forest or something like that. So again, our biologists are pretty good at spotting really suitable habitats. And again, always this caveat, if you don't hear from us in 30 days, document it and move on. We have a lot of fish to fry at the Department of Wildlife Resources, and we recognize that the majority of projects that you are implementing, if not all, are with the goal of improving the environmental situation associated with these farms and these sites. So when it comes to impacts upon threatened and endangered species or other wildlife under our jurisdiction, your projects are not our highest priority when it comes to landscape development, natural resource uses, and that sort of thing. So while we are paying attention to what you're doing out there, and you may hear from us on certain projects, we're not going to respond to every project request. So just understand that and, you know, move on. If you as a human have a real concern for a species associated with the site, you can always call me and I can at least do a quick check to see if, yes, I think we need to check in with the expert or no. But I'm going to tell you that probably 90% of the time you're not going to hear back from us, and that's a good thing. It means we don't have any concerns about your project, but it, or at least it hasn't hit our priority level, I guess I should say. It doesn't mean that we don't think there might be impacts or whatever, but again, it's not the highest priority for that species or that region or whatever it may be. So the biologists, I do hear from them that they're getting them from you and they're looking at them, but that they don't think that they are a major source of concern for the species under their jurisdiction. Are there any questions about all of that information? That's really the meat of the training for today. I do have some additional information to share with you and to give you additional resources about wildlife and Virginia's wildlife. But I have completed the part of what do I do if I get a hit from the database? Who do I coordinate with? All that sort of stuff. So I want to check in with you right now and see if you have any questions about that. And if not, then we'll just move on to the additional information.
I did have one question for you.
Okay.
If somebody finds and possibly identifies type of wildlife, animal, or whatever, I guess, is there a way for them to report it to DWR so it can be mapped?
Yeah, there's a couple ways to do that. One is that we have a wildlife mapping program that's a citizen science program, and anyone in Virginia, Soil and Water Conservation District affiliated or not, can enter their locations. We also, and that project can be found on iNaturalist, which is one of those apps online, and you can literally like take a picture and upload it and it goes right into a wildlife mapping database. So there's that way to do that. Or you can contact, if you know what the species is, if you can identify it, you can contact one of the folks on the list there for their jurisdiction. So if you found a bird, you could contact one of the bird guys and say, I found this bird. But if you don't know what it is, or you think it might be a common species, you can also call those regional staff that I showed at the end of the list, and they can certainly help you with that. And then worst case scenario is just give me a call. I can be the clearinghouse for all kinds of things. So if I'm not the right person to talk with, I can certainly put you in touch with that person. It may even be my staff member. But wildlife mapping is a great program. I might have, no, maybe I don't. I might have some information about that in the rest of the presentation. But if I don't, I'll show you where you can get it. But I do the wildlife mapping. I go to iNaturalist and I input my documentations all the time, just from like my yard or my neighborhood or whatever. So yeah. Any other questions? Or
so that was the other question that's there. I'm answering, typing it in the chat box now. So
okay.
I think that's it. And if
Okay.
anybody else knows of something while she's wrapping up, go ahead and put it in the chat box.
Yeah, this is your time to type in your questions, because I don't have that much longer, I don't think. So I am going to go through with you the Virginia Fish and Wildlife Information Service, which is our online data service that you can access as a staff member or as a visitor, just in case you want more detailed information. You don't need to coordinate with us based on the information that you get out of the Virginia Fish and Wildlife Information Service, unless it's specified in that guidance that we just went through. And I think the only thing that's specified there is maybe for the bats. And it's not even to look at this service, it's to look at the other applications, which I'll show you in a minute. So, but this is just there in case you're interested and want to get on and play around with and get data or wildlife information about your area or whatever. This again has been around since, well, the BOVA database, that Biota Virginia database, the one that has all the information about the species, again, was started in the 70s. I think the online service was more like the late 90s, mid 90s, I think, when it first started coming on board. The last time we re-engineered this system was 2004. So it's very old looking, but the data that are behind it continuously get updated. In fact, I think we just updated it about 6 weeks ago. So the data are good. The user interface, maybe not the greatest, but we'll get there. So if you want to go to VAFWIS, it's VAFWIS.org. And you can request through this email address registration to the system. There's no charge. It's just with this older system, this is how we did everything. Everybody had a registration. So you need to request registration if you want to have one. We started at Virginia Tech. Oops, DGIF, I left that one in there. Everybody uses it. All of our DWR staff, our partner agencies, consulting firms, students, the general public. There's all kinds of information on here besides just things you need to know for environmental review. There's 3 levels of access to this old system. Visitor, which is that you don't register, but you don't have access to a lot of the information if you do that. The other is institutional. This is where you need to get registration and you'll see buffered T&E data, but you can see most everything else. And then biologists, and that's for folks like me that are DWR staff, Fish and Wildlife Service staff. Renee, who's talked to earlier this morning, is natural heritage staff, so she gets to see more detailed information. But for most folks, we try to obscure some of that for the protection of the animals and their habitats. So this is what the information system looks like right now. Like I said, very old and outdated user interface, but you'll see some promise at the end of the presentation. When you have these, when you're logged in as an institution user, you can look at species information. You can do a geographic search of a project location. You can query the databases through the database search. So there's a couple of different options here. Back in the day when I liked to have animations, I put that together. Okay. Oh, and this one too, maybe. So if you look at species observations, this is these data typically come from our scientific collections permittees. So all the researchers out there on the landscape, all the universities, all the consulting firms, everyone who's out there surveying, they have to get a collections permit for us. Then they have to give those data back to us annually. And so we use these data, these scientific collection data, as the skeleton for a lot of the other data and services that we provide. So for example, right here on this report, I did a geographic search and I got a list of critters known or likely to occur in the area. And one of them that was confirmed, meaning that we have observed it in the project area, is maybe salamander, just this little critter up here. And if I click on the confirmed column yes link where this arrow is pointing, then it'll bring up a list of all the collections records for that species. And I can click on this for more detail, but it gives me dates and names of the collectors and that sort of thing. So from my perspective, this lets me know like how recently was this animal, collected there and who collected it and what was its disposition. This is particularly necessary for the mussels because sometimes we'll have a mussel record, but then it was just based on a relic shell or something like that. So we may not have as much concern if it's just a relic. So there's lots of information in here that help make decisions. You know, if you can kind of figure out how to do that. And then one of the other things you can do is click on show me these locations, and it'll show my projects area, which is this yellow circle with the project location in the middle of the circle. And then these kind of pink blobs are the aggregated locations of maybe salamanders. So there probably were a bunch of locations in here, so they just kind of aggregated it together. But basically what this does is it says to me, or it should say to you if you're reviewing the project, okay, I need to think about maybe salamanders here and, you know, see if I have any habitat, or maybe check in with the DWR, that sort of thing. We also have on the information system what we call resource data sets. And these are things like waters that have been designated as threatened and endangered species waters because they are known to inhabit that stream. Waterbird colonies, we have bald eagle shorelines, bat hives, all kinds of different data that we display all kinds of different ways. So for example, you can see here, this little project site, and I got a hit for a T&E water here, this purple one, and then, or maybe bluish kind of up there, and then more violet here. The color indicates whether it's a state listed species or a federally listed species. These are the bat hibernacula apps, which are recommended to you to look at for bats when you get hits from them in your system. And then this is an example of what we call a bald eagle concentration zone, where we know that bald eagles nest up and down that shoreline. Excuse me. And then we also have, you've heard me say a couple of times, the Biota Virginia, these life history distribution booklets for the species. And we saw that for the loggerhead shrike. When we clicked on that link in the conservation planner, it brought us to the loggerhead shrike page. This is that same thing, but this is for a green floater, which is a mussel. And so we have all of that is available through the online system. And like I mentioned before, it tracks the species by these numbers that we call BOBA numbers. And what you can think of these booklets as is just a good compilation of all the literature about the species, and then a little bit of geographic information based on our data, but most of it is just literature about the species, life history, and that kind of stuff. And then there's the database search where you can go in. I think we have 17 data sets that support VAFWIS. That might be in the new one, so maybe here it's more like 10. But you can build custom queries of those data sets. So in this example, if I wanted to look at breeding bird atlases in a particular county, then I would choose that county and I would hit search. Then it would give me a list of the breeding bird atlas blocks from that county. And then I could also look at a map of them if I wanted to. These are data you probably will never, you know, breeding bird atlas blocks is not something that triggers coordination with us, but VAFWIS, which is this information system, is meant to give you the information that you need related to projects, but it's also got just tons of other information in there for the general public, for people doing research, that kind of thing. And then there's a help section in VAFWIS. So if you're lost, you're not sure what to do, you don't know what something means, you need to contact, just click on that help link over here on the left-hand side, and it'll pop up all kinds of additional information and contact information and that sort of thing. There are some other resources that may be helpful to you, some things about climate change. We were part of the governor's climate change initiative a number of years ago. So us and our partners developed, lots of information capture about climate change and how it's going to affect our wildlife populations in Virginia. So that information is all available at our website. This is that bewildvirginia.org interactive tool where you can look at certain habitat features or things within your planning district. This, for example, I'm showing all the high quality wetlands. It also considers streams wetlands, so it's really the high quality waters. And then this is our state, this is the 2015 version of our state distribution of species of greatest conservation need. You'll notice the Tennessee Valley. This is a bio hotspot right here, a global hotspot for freshwater mussels, listed freshwater mussels. So that's why they pop up so much. But then you'll also see here, like around Dismal Swamp and some of our, habitat transitions and stuff, you get a lot more of that. The Piedmont, not so much. So just a kind of couple shots of our website. We have lots of information available here. So if you have questions about wildlife, their habitats, hunting, where to hunt, boating, where to boat, all that information is on here. Watchable wildlife information is on here, GIS resources. You can find links to us. All of that information is there on our website. It may be hidden. You may have to look around for it a little bit, but it's there. And then if you can't find it, you can always give us a call and we will try to find it for you. But there's lots of resources on the website and it continues to get better and better. Just a little bit about our specific wildlife information and environmental services section of the website. You've got environmental services, wildlife information services, a link to that fish and wildlife information service that I was just going over with you, and then a link to the additional resources, which include things like info sheets on particular species that we have concerns about, conflicts with humans, management documents for certain species. We have survey protocols for certain species, lists of surveyors for certain species. So there's all kinds of information there under wildlife information and environmental services. Okay, and this is the last part of my little spiel, so you get out early today. This is the next generation of that information system. So you heard me mention that we started it in the 90s. We hadn't updated it since 2004, the user interface. So this is where we're finally getting to update the user interface for our information system. Again, the data are the same, basically. We have built a couple new things for this one, but because we continue to update the data in the old VAFWIS, it's all the same data, but it's just going to be a new way to access it, a better way to access it. Again, we'll have you register, but this way that you do it with this new system, it'll be an auto registration process. So you'll be able to register yourself. You don't have to wait to hear back from us. We also, you can see here, are just going to provide links to all of our partners with whom you should also check related to wildlife in Virginia. So this is what the mapping window looks like here. Couple features that I'll point out to you. One is that it just looks more up to date. But you can also put in point lines or polygons instead of just a point. You can use the lat longs, the site address, the place name, or you can have saved sites that you pull up as your project area. So the toolbar is a lot better here. We also have different types of, here's a little toolbar on the mapping window. We are able to see different types of maps as our base map. So for example, I'm looking here at an aerial over basically Richmond, which is really nice to be able to tell what the habitat looks like. Like I said, you'll be able to draw like a line and then buffer that line. Here I did a 2-mile buffer, again, our sort of standard review buffer. And then I'm able to pull up a report or a page that has my report here on the left that tells me what's been documented from the site or what resources are known from nearby, while also being able to see my project site over here. So it's sort of an all-in-one window. And then you can expand using, again, this toolbar so that the emphasis is on the map, not on the report, but that you still have connectivity between the report and the map. So if I want to see a bigger picture of the map, but I want to be able to see the loggerhead strike documentations, I click them on, and here I am. I see these 3 little dots. Those are where the loggerhead strikes have been found in this area. And then I turned on the Appomattox River, which has been designated a threatened and endangered species. Oh no, Oh, sorry, people. Go right back to that. Yeah. So I have these three little loggerhead strike dots that come up, and then I have the Appomattox River, which is a threatened and endangered species water, and it's showing me how it flows through the project site. And then how it goes on above the site and below the site. So I can know how to address impacts upon that resource. So this is a really great new tool. We hope to have it up soon. Because BOVA is a rebuild and not a new build, it's a much longer process to take something that already exists and try to move it into new software and new platforms, as opposed to maybe starting new with a new data system, but that's where we are. So this part of the information system, this initial project assessment part, hopefully will be live soon. And then we'll continue to build the rest of the system. So that's where we're moving, trying to get away from that old data system and into a new one. And like I said, hopefully that'll be online soon. So that's all I have for you today. If there aren't any questions.
Yeah, I have one new question that's come in.
Okay.
Who deals with river herring, alewife, etc., that are dependent on river access and water quality?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the aspect of dealing with them. So our fish passage expert is Alan Weaver, and he's in our headquarters office, and he is technically responsible for fish access all across Virginia, but his focus has always been on the anadromous fishes, the ones that migrate so greatly. But you can talk to him, or Clint Morgeson, and he's on that contact list. He is our Region 1 fisheries manager, and he and his staff deal with all of those animals. And it just depends on partially who's available and where you are as to whom he may have you speak with. But Clint is probably the best initial contact for those types of issues, species.
Okay, last chance, everyone, to ask your questions live to Amy. While wait for any last minute questions to come in, want to thank Amy for her time today, as well as you for joining us and listening in. The information, the documents that she was speaking of, and other wildlife information you can get to within the application under the links to the right of those of the resource boxes as you get hits and returns for those. Just go to your right and you'll see the link for the DCR guidelines, which is truly our partners guidelines, and information sheets on some of those animals. Not seeing any other questions. So Amy, did you have anything else?
No, I just will reiterate to read through that guidance. Our purpose was that to have you contact in situations where we only really honestly have concerns for the species, and to let you do your good things in other situations.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amy. And tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. is Department of Historic Resources, and we'll do it all again for them. Thanks.
Thank you.